this video, we're going to talk about work orders and internal costs. We'll begin by looking at what is the difference between work orders versus purchase orders. And then from there, we're going to look at a couple different examples of how to create work orders and track those internal costs in Buildxact. Now, to begin, we start here on the actual costing screen. But before we get into creating work orders, I want to just take a quick moment and talk about the differences between a work order and a purchase order. Now, we covered this off earlier in another video, in the purchasing and receiving costs video, but in essence, the difference between the two is that work orders are meant for internal costs to your business. So some examples of that would be hourly labor for people, say, who you employ and you want to record their costs against the job. That would be done through a work order. Another really common example is if you have some machinery or equipment that you own that you also want to cost to a job, that would be done through a work order. Whereas a purchase order is an external cost to your business. So any situations where you're getting invoices, bills, you're paying credit card or whatever, that'll be done through purchase order. And the primary reason for the two different workflows is that anything that goes through the purchase order workflow will essentially and can essentially be pushed across to your accounting integration, where it can then be reconciled against that transaction and that bank feed. Whereas a work order, because it's an internal cost, it doesn't necessarily assume that it'll have a corresponding item in your accounting system. So that's the key difference between the two. On that being said, though, the work orders are very similar. So for today's video, we're going to go through two different examples. And the first one is here, starting in the actual costings, where we have an existing item in which we need to put a cost against. So let's just say we want to put some cost against this item here. So I'll go ahead and give it a tick, and I'm going to click order at the bottom. Important thing to note is that when you first create the item via the order button, it's actually going to default it to a purchase order. And it does that just because for the vast majority of costs, they will be purchase orders. They will be basically external costs. But for today, we want to hit the button and mark it as a work order. Then from there, we follow basically the same process, i.e. we're going to give it a description. So I'll just call it framing labor. We're going to assign it to a contact, and for the vast majority of time, you're really just assigning it to yourself. Then from there at the bottom, basically Buildxact is going to go ahead and pre-fill all that information in here. The only other real difference, though, between the purchase order and the work order flow here is the status is going to be slightly different. And when I mark it as complete, Buildxact is just going to prompt me here just to edit the below figures to reflect what quantities and dollar amounts were actually expended as a part of this particular project. So I'm going to go ahead and just change it to a labor item. And let's say, for example, that we had originally thought 375 lineal feet at that particular dollar cost, but maybe actually we overestimated it and it turns out it's only, say, 325 lineal feet as an example. So once we've made the changes here, to finish, we're going to go ahead and hit save and close, and that'll automatically update the actual quantity. So we have a great comparison right away to see how that cost is reflected. Then we have the actual total, and here you can see that we have a $650 variance in the positive, i.e. we've only spent 87% of the cost for that particular item. Now, the second example we're going to go through is really in the circumstances where we don't have an item from the actual costings that we can select and put the cost against that. So this could be something where it's out of scope. Maybe we didn't anticipate the cost or quote on it or something like that. But basically for that, we're going to jump into the work order screen and we're going to go ahead and add in a work order. Again, it's a very similar workflow. So let's just do, maybe we had some machinery costs. Again, we're going to assign it to, this case, ourselves. The only other real key difference here is that we need to go ahead and add in the item. So maybe we had a bobcat or something like that we unexpectedly needed to use on the project. And perhaps it was, say, 4 hours at $120 an hour. On that, though, we need to go ahead and tell Buildxact, well, where do we want these costs to eventually live? Now, on that, and similar to the purchase order workflow, we can leave this actuals category blank. And in that case, Buildxact will add a new category with the name of the work order here as the category name. So we could do that if we want, or we can also go ahead and just type in here to create a new item. Or when we tick in here, as you can see, it'll also come up with a list of the existing actual costings category. So let's go ahead and put it back into rental items, and repeating the process basically we did a moment ago. We're going to mark it as complete. Buildxact is again just going to get us to confirm that the quantities and costs entered in are correct. And for now, say they are. So we'll hit save and close. That'll automatically create that new work order. And navigating back to the actual costings here and jumping back into the rental items, you'll see that Buildxact has added in that new item with a zero budget, but it has recorded the costs in there. And really, that's just going against the category costs at that stage. And that's how to do work orders and internal costs.